It is my honor to introduce the Blue Legacy Awards as a fulfillment of that task. This year's winners, selected by the members of the Water Conservation Advisory Council, represent some of the greatest advancements in stewarding our state's most vital and precious resource. They are leaders in showing how we can ensure a water future for Texas, and for that, we thank them. Now it is my honor to introduce the chairwoman of the Water Conservation Advisory Council, Karen Guz, to present the awards, along with Aubrey Spear, who is the general manager for the San Jacinto River Authority. Please join me.
Hello. Thank you, Chairwoman Stepney. We want to start with a reminder of what everybody knows about water, that the most affordable and reliable water we have in Texas is the water we don't yet use. This is followed by the water that we keep clean and use very carefully. Ultimately, the stewardship of our water comes down to the public awareness, and the awareness specifically of its fragility and how scarce it can be. These awardees exemplify ways to help us advance the awareness of water across our state. So the first organization that we want to recognize, first let me tell you a little bit about the awards. The Texas Water Foundation has organized this for us, and we thank them. And we want to thank the work of the Blue Legacy Awards Committee, which is all volunteers, and also the judges and the sponsorships of the Texas Water Foundation, who made it possible for us to have the beautiful awards we're going to show you. I am proud to present this year's winners, who were selected with new criteria that included transparent data, measurable benefits, and increasing that awareness in Texas of the things we need people to know about water. These are truly leaders that represent a high standard of excellence. Now I'm going to show you a picture so you can get a look at these gorgeous awards. Each winner today is going to receive a hand-blown glass pitcher by Caliente Hot Glass of San Antonio. Swirled into the glass is a representation of the Texas hydrologic cycle, from our ever-changing skies to the rivers, lakes, and aquifers. Like our water system, the pitcher is robust, but FYI, for those getting them, it is breakable and irreplaceable, so please handle it with care. There is another piece to the award that is unique and represents the story of water, and that is that there is an oak slab that each pitcher is going to sit on. This is a slab of polished post oak that is at least 155 years old. Thanks to experts at Texas A&M Forest Service for counting every ring and for naming even the drought of record on the rings that you can see. It's a fascinating thing to be able to see the history of our water in Texas. When this tree started growing in Bastrop County, I thought I had a picture of that tree, I do not. When this tree started growing in Bastrop County near the banks of the Colorado River, Texas was home to less than 500,000 people. That tree died shortly after the drought of 2011, when the population was close to 30 million people in our state. The densities that you'll be able to see if you come up and admire these pieces of the tree show the story of the century and a half of floods and droughts and perseverance. So take a look at them. These are great records of what has come and what we can expect. For our first award, we have Credit Human. Congratulations to Credit Human, the recipient of the Blue Legacy Award for Efficiency. In 2024, the operations staff of the new 200,000 square feet Credit Human headquarters were able to offset an astounding 79% of the building's potable water needs through on-site water harvested that included rainwater, air conditioning condensate, and reuse water. Did we get a picture with Steve, or you already got a picture?
Oh, you can stay and we'd like to take. Everyone.
Yeah, we'd like to get a picture of you, Steve, if you don't mind coming up here.
Okay, for this next award, congratulations to Greg Eckhart and the San Antonio Water System, who are recipients of the Blue Legacy Award for Source. Greg Eckhart led an unprecedented 10-year effort for the San Antonio Water System to annually dedicate 50,000 acre-feet of privately owned groundwater-based effluent for the broader benefit of the San Antonio River and its bay. This effort has advanced the discussion of how we can protect Texas rivers and estuaries.
For our next award, it's the Legacy of Awareness. Congratulations to the Harris-Galveston Subsidence District's Water Conservation School program called H2O Lab for winning this Blue Legacy Award. The H2O Lab provides nearly 20,000 Houston area students with locally based water education and subsidence and resources to encourage best practices for water efficiency. It results in an estimated 180 million gallons of conserved water a year.
Okay, for this next award, we congratulate the Texas A&M Forest Service and the Texas Forestry Association, who are the recipients of the Blue Legacy Award for Commitment. For 35 years, through education, technical assistance, research, and independent audits, the Texas A&M Forest Service and the Texas Forestry Association have continually improved forest management. Working forests in Texas now protect more than 19,000 miles of streams and 1.4 million acres of riparian buffers. This ensures 15 million acre-feet of clean water annually, more water than is used by every public water utility in the state of Texas.
Our final award goes to the campsite at Shield Ranch for the Blue Legacy Award called Best in Flow. This is home to the first TCEQ-approved public water system that collects, treats, and conveys on-site rainwater. The 6,400-acre Shield Ranch hosts public programs, community groups, and a 4th through 12th grade summer camp for kids so they can connect with nature. On average, El Ranchito campers use 12 gallons of water per day. That is, by the way, less than a fourth of the average municipal water user. Please join me in congratulating all of our winners. So on a final note, if this piques your interest in the Water Conservation Advisory Council and the Blue Legacy Awards, please visit our website, which is savetexaswater.org, and start collecting your data now so that you can apply next year for the next round of Blue Legacy Awards. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of the award winners. You all have given us something to aspire to. Conservation is so important, protecting our existing supplies. So congratulations.
So with respect to our legislative priorities, as many of you know, the Texas Water Development Board is one of a handful of state agencies that is authorized to make recommendations to the legislature. We do that. It's a pretty thorough process internally. We work with our various offices to identify maybe some cleanups in statute that are needed, perhaps some impediments to the agency being able to fulfill its mission and accomplish its goals effectively. And through that process, it basically works its way up to the board. The board then approves those recommendations, and most of those recommendations then result in legislation that we work with legislators to file, and we help them guide it through the process. We've been very successful over the last few sessions in our recommendations. I think that's a testament to the agency and to the board and to the support that we provide to the legislature during session. So without further ado, here's our quick list. So the first one, and it's intentionally first, but it doesn't have a bill that we'll be working on. Oh, Senator Perry's leaving the Capitol, so good timing. For those of you who are tracking his whereabouts.
So we'll exit stage left when he gets here, right?
What's that?
We'll exit stage left when he gets
for
here.
sure. So one of the things that our board felt was important to do is to signal to the legislature the importance of long-term sustainable financing. Those of you who were here yesterday for Chairwoman's panel with Heather and Stacy and Laura, I know you heard a lot about the need for additional funding into the water fund. What did we learn yesterday? $5 billion into the fund. And then I think Heather jumped that up to 10 at the end. So maybe we go to 15 or 20 today, should we? Regardless, with respect to additional funding into the water fund, an additional one-time appropriation that's already somewhat teed up in the introduced budget bills, and then a separate parallel effort to establish a dedicated revenue stream. Chairwoman Stepney, any kind of thoughts or comments on that effort?
Well, as I mentioned yesterday, water funding is very important. Many of our, and y'all heard it through the conference, a lot of our programs are just oversubscribed. So the more funding we have, and I'll leave it to the legislature to decide how much and where those sources of funds come from, it just means we can help more communities. We can help a lot of the water systems that are, struggling with, arsenic or radionuclides or a whole list of things, and they have some compliance issues. We can help first-time water providers or communities with first-time service, and then we can help big regional projects, for some of our wholesale water providers. So funding is needed, and we can certainly put the money to work.
Perfect. So our next initiative has to do with consistent rural definition. Last session, there was an effort to establish a consistent rural definition for all of our financial assistance programs. We worked tirelessly with then TWCA, drop in the C, now TWA, the Rural Water Association, other stakeholders, and members of the legislature. And at the end of the day, realized that there was a bit of an error in the definition, and so we've got an effort to clean that up this time. It was simply a scrivener's error, and if there's a silver lining in this experience, it's that I learned the word scrivener, or scrivener's error. And what that means is just a legal typo. And so we've been able to utilize some flexibility in current law, and now working to correct that error. And so everyone will have a clear idea of who's rural and who's not. And that's important because there's certain elements to our financial assistance that rural communities have access to that perhaps urban don't. If it's okay, I'll just kind of run through the list and then we can open up to Q&A. We have a planning rule sync-up bill. So this bill is going to allow our legal team to review our administrative rules every 5 years if it's, of course, passed by the legislature instead of 4. Right now, we look at our administrative rules every 4 years, but as you know, our planning cycles are 5 years. And so it makes sense to kind of sync those up so that, at the end of each planning cycle, we can look at our administrative rules and make any helpful updates. We've got a groundwater management plan clarification bill. When a DFC is petitioned and found to be unreasonable, there was some uncertainty on which DFC, the old one or the new one, that a groundwater conservation district should include in their management plan. This kind of came up a few years ago, and we've had suggested agreed upon language that was included in other bills, and those other bills did not pass for reasons that have nothing to do with this clarification. And so this time around, with the blessing of the legislature and key members, we've got a standalone bill just to give us that statutory clarification when we're reviewing management plans. We've got some Texas grant management standards that apply to a couple of our financial assistance programs. I'm going to throw some acronyms at you: the WALAF, the Water Loan Assistance Fund, and the RWAF, the Rural Water Assistance Fund. That way, so those are two programs that we essentially dusted off when the Texas Water Fund was created and the $1 billion was put in there. And so we have kind of dual management or grant management standards that apply to those programs. And so we're going to try to just correspond those, get an exception to the grant management standards that Texas has to apply across the board, in large part because our grant management standards are more robust. Next to last, SWIFT reporting requirement. Right now, we're required to put all abridged apps and full apps of SWIFT applications online. It's very tedious, and frankly, very few people actually access that information. We have to go through all those applications and redact certain information. And so this will allow anyone who wants those applications to still submit a public information request, but we just won't have to proactively put that on and burn staff time, primarily our legal folks having to review that info. And last but not least, and I think this is frankly going to be of interest to many of you, potential groundwater donations to the Water Trust. Those donations can be made for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes they're for ecology, for nature, or just for preservation. Right now, statute doesn't clearly dictate who might review said potential donations. And so this would provide that statutory clarification so that the Water Development Board would review those potential donations, and then entities that want to, and I know we've got a couple interested parties already that have some groundwater they'd like to donate. That way we can go forward with those donations. So that may be too many words, and I assure you there is not a pop quiz that will be passed out after our impromptu panel, but I'd love to entertain any questions.
So we'll stop here before we go over our exceptional item request.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions?
All right.
All right, let's do our exceptional item request.
Fair enough. So I'll just run down the list, and then we are inputting all these in the system. Some of these are a little different than what you might have seen in our LAR. We do have an opportunity to update our exceptional items around this time of session. And so we've asked for some additional FTEs and GR to pay them, 50 FTEs and about $8 million. And this will allow us, with the additional money that we're allocating from the Texas Water Fund, as well as potential more money that the legislature is anticipating into said fund. This will give us some more people power to get that money out the door. We're also asking for some targeted salary adjustments. As you know, it's always a challenge for a public entity to compete not only with other public entities, but the private sector in attracting and retaining staff. And so this will allow us to increase some salaries to get everybody kind of at the mid-range. And then those harder to approach or harder to attract and retain positions, we can be a little more attractive to those candidates.
And Bryan, yesterday I mentioned that we need people. We need people, and we need to be able to retain people. And so these are very important, 1 and 2 on our list, especially since, we've gone from, I believe it was about a $6 billion portfolio about 10 years ago to $22 billion. And so we need engineers, we need finance folks, we need purchasers, we just need people. And so these are our number 1 and 2 priorities for the board, very important to us.
Awesome. We're also looking at reclassifying our board members, just to align them with their fellow commissioners at similar agencies. We've got a revision to our Hurricane Harvey rider. Right now, Hurricane Harvey money is in the TURF, that's the Texas Infrastructure Resiliency Fund, but TDM actually uses a majority of those funds for Hurricane Harvey relief and resiliency. And so we're just clarifying that money can continue to be used to the statutory deadline of 2031. We're requesting additional money for our CAP grants, for our SRF programs. This is the 20% that the state is required to match when we're pulling down federal CAP grants for our clean water and drinking water state revolving funds.
And Bryan, the senator's here, they're just getting him mic'd up. So as soon as he comes in, y'all don't want to hear from us.
Yeah.
We'll wrap up.
So
and he's here.
I see him. I knew he was on the way. He texted me leaving Capitol. My reply was, "You duh man." So with that,
Good
here's
morning,
the man
Senator.
himself. Can I get my portfolio?
I'm going to exit this
You want me to stand?
No, we
You
can't.
want to stay?
No, we're good.
Thank you, Senator. Welcome to
Good to see you.
Senator, I was wowing them with our exceptional item requests and our legislative recommendations earlier, so.
That explains everybody's chin on the table.
I know.
There you go.
First and foremost, I want to thank you and your busy schedule. Having worked over there for 15 years, I know how hard it is to meet all the demands on your time and attention, so appreciate you giving us a little bit of that today.
Sure, no problem. Just serving on finance, that's kind of a prime committee assignment.
Yeah.
And plus, you learn a lot and you reacquaint yourself with all the dollars we appropriate to the faces that are beneficiaries of that. So I hate missing them, but from a member's perspective, there's a lot of people that wanted those seats. So when you get one, you need to be there. So that's a challenge. And then when you go on the Senate floor and you have Senate resolutions from your district as well as other members, you never know. So I just apologize for being late, but it's expected this time of year, and I hope the grace is extended.
Absolutely. A quick icebreaker. So over the last few years, we've got to know each other a little better with some hobbies, maybe shared hobbies, and some interests. So just introduce yourself on a personal level with your variety of skills, be it woodworking, hunting, outdoorsman, or even gardener. Some people may not know how green your thumbs are.
Well, skills is a stretch. I have a lot of hobbies and not enough time, but grandkids, that ties into gardening, beekeeping, which I've flopped at miserably and probably have decided no longer, and then woodworking. I have a full-blown shop that less than 10 hours of use on it for 3 years probably. So, but I do enjoy building stuff and making mistakes and cussing and losing my witness shortly and coming back to that regularly.
Well, you still got all your fingers, so you're doing something right. So some of you know I have an artistic background, and my studio used to be at a place in town here called Splinter Group, and most of the kind of other artists there are woodworkers. And so one of these days, the chairman and I are going to go over there and poke around and hopefully keep those fingers where they're supposed to be. So you mentioned your grandkids, and I've heard you speak both publicly and we've spoken privately about how important the future of Texas with respect to a secure water future is to those grandkids. So I want to touch some hearts here and have the audience hear a little bit more about your grandkids and your vision for their future.
Well, there's no better place on earth. This is as close to heaven as you get without being there. But I truly believe the state has reached a point where if we don't address the water challenges that we all know exist, some more than others, and truly the current water plan tells us we have a problem coming. The time differential, I think, is what's suspect at best. It's not a 50-year metric. We don't live in 50-year worlds anymore. We are changing so fast from a population, industry, and other segments that those 50-year horizons, when they made sense, don't make sense anymore. So we're really closer to 250, but I cannot, in good conscience, leave this place without doing whatever I was supposed to do to secure water supply. And that's where our focus has been since 15 as chairman, but even prior to that, Arby Spear sitting here on the front row, I think I asked him on a phone call, how long have I been talking about water supply? He said at least 30 years. So it's not new to me, but we have the opportunity to address this. And it's really for my grandkids and their kids. I don't know that I'll drink a glass of water from it. You're a young enough man, you may. You hold your age well if you don't, but I just say it's time. And we've done our homework, your groups, and groups like yourself in this audience have done their work. And the need is clearly apparent in the legislature. I just had a conversation with a member before Senate started, and I was expecting him to be a little reluctant to go where we're going, and he absolutely is all in. That's been the experience for the last 2 years. I can't find people that don't say, yes, it's time, and yes, we need to address it. So, but a large part of that is because the awareness and the voice that you guys as association, again, have done and the work that we put into getting it to that point. You don't show up on January 14th and say, have I got an idea for you? It's only $65 billion, and we need 5 to start, and we need you don't get to have that conversation on January 14th. The legwork to get it to where it's at today was critical. It's important. I'm just happen to be the lucky guy in the seat that gets to address it. My predecessors for 7 decades kept talking about a need that would be here. I'm sitting in the chair and point to the fact that the need has arrived. And I think that's the distinction and the difference that makes this a viable option for the state to move forward on. But it's all about the legacy of the kids, my grandkids specifically, but it's really about Texas legacy and Texas future. This is the only thing that we're not addressing that is going to be the limiting cap on Texas that we love and know today. If we get this right, there is no cap. The energy companies, the sectors, the technology, the things that people want to do in this state that are limited by water, when we address the water, Katie barred the door, we're 7th largest economy in the world. We can literally move ourselves to the top 3 pretty quickly when we can show people you can come here and you'll have water to do it. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. First of all, it's solvable. Secondly, we have the wealth to solve it. And I think we have the will to do it now.
That's awesome. A quick aside, I've never met the senator's grandkids, but I have seen photographs of his grandsons. Now, careful. The photograph I remember, they were swimming, and one of them forgot his trunks. So
they take after pops.
Yeah, right?
Clothes are optional up to about 1st grade when I was a kid.
All natural.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. So you mentioned a second
Erase
ago.
that visual. If that's ruined y'all's day, I'm sorry, but it's just the truth. I mean, they get it genetically.
Our communications staff are like, yeah, come on, man. It's the last time Senator Perry's going to get on stage with you if you keep this up. You mentioned, kind of the genesis of this idea a few years ago. And I remember specifically when I heard you first talk about your vision. It was up in Amarillo. I was at a groundwater summit, and you were talking about leaky pipes in rural Texas. I remember that's kind of where you started a couple years ago, and now 2-3 years later, Senate Bill 28 passed $1 billion and hopefully counting in the water fund. As you know, the Water Development Board worked very closely with you and your office and other key members and leadership to develop a solid implementation plan for most of that $1 billion. utilizing our different financial assistance programs, looking forward to moving forward in the new water supply fund for Texas, and capitalizing on the flexibility and trust that the legislature provided to us to get that job done. We prioritize water conservation projects and water loss projects, and we're making, a dent in that issue, but granted, a lot of the issues that we face in the water world are big, as you've already alluded to. We're using portions of that $1 billion to support SWIFT for new water supply. How was the passage of that bill last session, Senate Bill 28? Help us understand, from your perspective, that accomplishment from your point of view.
Yeah, that bill was setting the table. To be perfectly honest, most of my colleagues didn't understand that bill. They didn't understand where the billion was going to do, what it was for, specifically the new water supply bucket that was set up. Nobody really fully understood the purpose of that bucket. I did. I clearly knew where I was going, and I'm not surprised that we're having this conversation this session, because it was just the cash surplus started the conversation. That was time to have the conversation, both last session and this session. That new supply bucket was very clear its purpose in my mind. In our water world, when you talk to members and the general public, they mix flood, infrastructure, supply, all under one umbrella. They all think water. If you asked a member last session what we funded, they would say, well, we funded water. And they would think that was flood and anything. I mean, they don't make that distinction, but it's an important distinction to make. We have multiple issues on the horizon in the water world. We have supply that needs to be addressed today. We have flood infrastructure that needs to be addressed today. And we have leaky pipes and sewer treatment water plants that are dilapidated, overcapacitated, that need to be addressed today. So that was the setting of the table, and splitting, if you will, the 250 was a reservation. It was a holder for what was to come in the Senate bill, SJR, that I'll do this year, and in future be the recipient, but it'll be a constitutionally dedicated process so that the legislature doesn't get to make the decision whether we fund it or not next year, next 2 years. And it gives the predictability to vendors to go out and do these decade-long and billion-dollar projects. So I knew where we were going, but truthfully, and it's a sad statement, but it's a fact, not very many people get excited about water. It's not a really interesting subject matter, right? And people just believe our taps are going to continue to run. So I had a vision for what the 250 was doing. And I knew, and I've said it before, that people would listen, and I'd say that's going to be a multi-billion-dollar turn through that process, through that bucket of funding over the next 50 years. But it now have the reciprocal set up to receive those funds and go out from it. So this session, we're going to leave in November, hopefully with voter approval. We're going to leave the session in May with a constitutional vote of dedicated revenue going to that bucket with a split for possibly SWIFT and the Water Development Board's discretion. The reason I say possible SWIFT, I'm open to experts to tell me where the best source of that supply goes. But we will leave, and we're moving flood funding underneath Water Development Board's purview so that when we leave, every aspect of water could potentially be a recipient, with the discretionary part being the Water Development Board's piece, a consistent stream of funding going forward. We've never had that. It's a catch-as-catch-can. It's where the legislature lands. It's if we have the money or not. We will set that conversation aside, and we'll have a continuity of funding for all water aspects into the future. And we'll review that after 16 years, and we'll reallocate the percentage of those funds. If we believe we're ahead on supply and we need to do more here, we'll have those options. Think of road funding, it'll be exactly like road funding, which I remind people, there is a $38 billion road budget in this current biennium budget conversation because we dedicated a constitutional revenue source in 13, and it grew with the growth of the state. I don't know that we get a growth factor built in today, but I promise you over time, legislatures will revisit when they see the program that's operating and where we're going and how far we're advancing supply. It's a start, but it's going to be a significant start. I feel very confident to say pretty clearly in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a very clear picture of what those dollars look like, I hope.
I love that idea. And so, as you know, I've been trying to promote my nickname for the New Water Supply for Texas Fund. So if, to help that gain some momentum, should we call it the Newt? We can solve this right here and now.
I'm indifferent. Nomenclature makes no difference
I
to me.
keep
No
trying to
names.
pry that word out of your
Yeah,
mouth when it
yeah.
comes to the New Water Supply.
I don't
I'm
know
gonna
if
keep
lizards
trying.
and waters makes sense. But,
Yeah, I get it. Well, that was my try. I'm partial to nicknames around the Water Development Board, so you'll have to forgive me. Another thing I remember you had said, that sometimes water isn't at the, water funding isn't at the forefront of everyone's minds at the Capitol, and I would propose and suggest that you've done yeoman's work making sure that it's on everyone's mind. And I think that back in Senate Finance, we talked about making water sexy. And so, not to say that that's the best word choice, but I think you, Senator, have done a considerable job of getting water in everyone's mind and on everyone's, at the front of their thoughts. So thank you for that. Here's a softball question. We've got $250 million in the Newt. Is that enough? Is that enough? You just kind of alluded on some ideas and that'll come into focus coming up. So kind of if you had the magic wand, the funding magic wand, what kind of numbers would you?
Well, I think, no, it's not enough. And enough is a conversation of how much local and how much state participation, what those look like. There are some aspects of the leaky pipes that I'm sad to say was a local issue that should have been addressed, that they've diverted those funds to general fund fundings in some of these budgets. So
Yes, sir.
I'm going to go down that conversation and figure out how much of that diversion's happened, and they're not going to be eligible to receive funding until they stop that diversion. So some of our leaky pipe infrastructure was funded. It just went to pay good things, officer salaries and streetlights, but we can't fund municipals that are diverting funds for water infrastructure like sewer treatment. So that's one conversation. But again, these numbers have gotten so big and take so long, local taxing jurisdictions can't eat this animal anymore. Secondly, the political will to push that out, especially in water supply development to its constituents ahead of the recipient of water. Politically, that's a no. It's never going to happen. We don't live in a pay-it-forward society anymore. We don't live in that 1950s culture that was looking out for the 30-year generation down the road. They all want to know what it's about me, and we see that clearly in our legislative policies. I'm going to be in trouble, and I'll go ahead and say it, but I love property tax credits. I think it's great to give money back, but the truth of the matter is it's temporary in relief. People feel a little better, but we've got $51 billion of property tax relief since 2019 when we started doing compression. In the current biennium budget, we have $32 billion of property tax buy down that in 2 years you won't even know that it existed. And we're looking at water, roads, grid, healthcare, and other options that arguably, I think if you told the common everyday citizen out there, we don't have this golden goose that lays this egg for roads and this one for water and this one for Medicaid. It's one big pocket, and we have to prioritize those. As I have these conversations in my meetings with town halls and groups and give them those perspectives, they pick infrastructure every time. So we've got to do a better job of policymakers. But I get back to, there's not going to be a point where state funds this total cost. The way the plan is supposed to work is we front load to keep the mayors at the city council level from having the conversation, I need money now so that your kids will have water 30 years from now, because that's a no-go. So if we front load and get the raw rolling as water delivery occurs 15, 20 years down the road, and I think there's some low-hanging fruit that when the funding's available, we'll get there a little quicker, the state recovers that cost back into the fund and becomes a source. Unlike the, I I love the misinformation. I'm already getting it today. I've had 2 different conversations. You're creating a water tax. No, I'm not. My predecessors learned that it was a political no-go, and I don't think we need that today. That's what's different from us in the tax, the highway fund, is they get a dedicated severance tax, but they also have a gas tax, right? So we don't have that. So not the shortfall, but the challenge in the plan is the money, even at $1 billion a year plus a jump start, isn't going to be enough to move the ball very fast. But truthfully, vendor communities, $1 billion a year is a lot to manage in the network. So it's going to be a little bit longer than I like. I'm an impatient person. I don't have attention span very long. I was ADD before there was a ADHD or whatever it was before there was a name for it. But the challenge is there won't be enough money to move the needle fast, but there'll be enough money to move the needle some, and people will get excited, and I hope we can find partnerships that don't exist today once we do that. But if you could drop $65 billion in there today, I'd say that was enough money.
Fair enough.
The vendor community can't manage that clearly, but my point is it's going to take, not unlike the SWIFT fund, that was a 50-50 partnership. Now, arguably the SWIFT fund was credit leverage and very few direct dollars. So this is different in that aspect. These are going to be a lot of direct dollars. They'll be state participation based. The Texas Water Development Board does an awesome job at local sponsored projects, but the pipeline that the state will own is a different animal, and we'll recover that cost as delivery occurs for the new supply through that.
That's a perfect segue into, again, I'm promoting a nickname here, the Perry Plan, and I know you don't want to call it that, but let's talk a little bit about that. Here we are a couple weeks into session. Things are actually starting to get rolling. What are your goals and priorities for this session specific to that statewide grid, that Perry Plan?
I got to have an SJR approved at the legislature. I'm asking for $1 billion a year commitment in November 25 vote. Money transferred possibly on January 26th. We have a statewide reclamation and conservation district or authority that we're developing through statute. It's not an agency, but it'll be the authority responsible for the statewide pipeline conversations and oversights and making sure that the money's being spent where it needs to be and prioritizing some of those dollars, how they fit in the mold that we're trying to make it. But so those things will take a year. We also have ongoing conversations with other places that want to sell us water. We've got clearly some federal conversations that we'll have to have. So the practical application of when we see actual dirt turned or pipes put in is probably a couple of years out. I do think in talking to some wholesale water providers that if not but for the lack of funding, they would have already developed some of the sources they need 10 or 15 years out. So there may be some opportunity there. But so the SJR is critical. If we just get a lump sum, I'm asking for $5 billion. House budget came out with 2.5, Senate bill came out with 2.5. That's a starting point. It could go up from there, it won't go down. But if that's all we got, we have not moved the needle on water supply. It requires a consistent, continuity, predictable future revenue stream, or we didn't move the needle. So I have commitment, Lieutenant Governor, Speaker, and Governor, that we will have that constitutional vote. What's currently in conversation is how much. I'm asking for $1 billion perpetual into perpetuity per year. The state's going to spend $1 billion on something next budget session, and it'll be something different. It should dedicate that money. We need to make that commitment. So that's where I hope to see. So that SJR is critical. The lump sum is important. It shows commitment to industries who are beginning to have the conversation about what about water supply if we come. It puts a stake in the ground. And then if it is a $5 billion number, there are significant things that we can do fairly quickly in the water world, 10 years range on some desal plants out of the Gulf or coast possibly. But that's enough money to actually complete some projects, right? But the rest of them it's just going to have to be kind of no different than you guys do. You have a certain amount of money and you stretch it as far as you can go and you start the projects you feel comfortable in doing. We'll work through that.
Sure. And obviously we can utilize loans that are repaid, that can revolve. Right. We have opportunities to leverage. And so, yeah, I keep wishing someone would ask, like, How much do you need? My answer would be how much you got,
Yeah.
right?
And I think federal participation, not known today, but when we start this, there will be things, especially with this administration and a national conversation on water supply that needs to happen, that I believe will happen for some conversation I'm currently having at some people, fellow Texans that are now in the administration. We're having some of those national conversations. So I think water, although it's not his issue today, I think our current president and his administration will migrate a little bit more towards water conversations before he gets out of that office, if I have my way. So
We're counting on you.
be good. Don't count me out. Don't count me out.
Quick recap. So kind of a statewide distribution authority that would own, operate, and maintain
Pipeline.
one of these days a statewide grid. Maybe allowing the water fund money to flow to the flood infrastructure fund as well. If you have your way, $1 billion a year dedicated, kicking in, I think, maybe in fiscal year 28.
Money be moved in 26, application, engineering, soft cost, all that to be done, but physical deployment of infrastructure, probably a couple of years out at least.
Yeah.
Just for the work that's got to get done.
And then I know yesterday we were chanting this, $5 billion into the water fund, but my last name is McMath, and I just noticed that 2.5 plus 2.5 in both versions of the bill, that equals 5. So I'm remaining hopeful that we're going to get what you want.
I am too. I'd say something about the budget. We are flat now in our budget process, as I've said, and as most people are paying attention. We have now lived through COVID. We've lived through the buying interruptions, the supply interruptions, the surplus spending of sales tax dollars that people pin up and bought. We've cleared the decks. All of that's gone. Our comptroller came out with around a 3% increase in sales tax. That's back to normal pre-COVID budget dollars. So this is a critical session to close the door on some infrastructure stuff and there's $5 billion going to grid if the lieutenant governor has a way. So, but we're back to normal on the budget process. But if you figure a 6 to 8% inflation and we're budgeting a 3% increase, we're underwater, no pun intended, on purchasing power. So just to say, this is our window, this is our time to kick off some conversations about water supply long term. It won't be here again for a long time. And actually, if we don't do this, I believe we'll start having companies make different decisions from coming here. So I think everybody gets that. I think that's where people are at.
So we're going to do one more question and then open it up for
Sure.
Q&A. I know you've been reaching out to a lot of stakeholders, talking to groups about your priorities, the plan, the funding sources, the amounts. And this is going to tee up our Q&A, which we'll shift to next. What are some of the concerns that you've heard? How, a savvy legislator such as yourself, how do you intend to use those concerns to inform the plan and make this better going forward during session?
I try to maintain an open door, and I think anybody that knows me would say it's true. So I'm always interested in hearing unintended consequences or concerns, because that's how you make the process as tight as you can. I'm not naive. We're going to throw this out there, and we're going to see some things that we didn't see coming. At the same time, we're going to have some really good things happen that we didn't see coming. So in the big, long scheme of things, it'll balance itself out pretty well. But I need that input. I can tell you two things I've heard today. One, I'm developing a water tax. It's going to be statewide, and absolutely not true. I wish on some level I could, just so that I could address this bigger funding conversation, but that's not politically doable, nor do I think it's necessary today. We still have options before we have to look to that. I'm not proposing it. I don't see us having to do it now, but depending on how fast the growth continues and things, we may have to get a little quicker. And we have to build these private partnerships that companies coming in may have to participate a little earlier than what we expect. So we'll see where those go. The other thing I heard today was, and if anybody's in this region, it's not a slam on you, but somebody came to me and said, I heard you're moving water out of Caddo Lake. No. If that was the only source in Texas for water, I still would not move water out of Caddo Lake. To be clear, we have experts in the water community, in the wholesale water community, in the environmental realm. We have experts that make sure we don't do unintended harms in things. I didn't change any of those processes. All I'm doing is bringing more water to those processes. And so I'm not draining a lake. I'm not proposing moving water from one lake to another. I'm going to let the experts that have this figured out for the most part today do their job. I don't want to be a wholesale regulator. I don't want to be a micromanager of a sewer plant. I don't want to be redistributing water a different way than already is in place. That doesn't make sense economically. So those are the concerns I've heard today. I've heard a few about the source of dedication of funds, that we don't want to go there and stuff. And truthfully, the matter is, that's my decision. I'm going to do what's politically possible. We have a couple of buckets to pull from. I'm actually proposing we pull from 2 different buckets. That should be apparent in the next week or two. The diversity of income is one that it kind of insulates you from downturns in the economy a little bit. Both were predictable revenue streams and at a level I can live with. There's no good way to tell a guy on budget that this is not going to reduce your $1 billion access next year. It is, but it's time. But I'm pitching a 2-pronged constitutional dedicated revenue stream. If you look at our road funds, it's severance tax and it's sales tax. Worked out like a charm, bigger than anybody expected. But where I get that money from is ultimately a policy decision to be voted on by the members, and anybody that has any concerns about that dedication source, honestly, I don't have a lot of entertainment value for that. There's different reasons to do difference. I'm going to allow the Lieutenant Governor and my members help me get there.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to open it up to Q&A. I think we have staff with microphones. If you just raise your hand. See Sarah Kirkle up here.
Sarah Kirkle.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, first we want to thank you for your leadership on this issue. You have a very friendly audience here that understands the critical importance of this investment. We saw while we've been in here that the Lieutenant Governor issued his priorities, and that water will be Senate Bill 7. We're excited. Hopefully that's a lucky number for us. But just wanted to be clear, when we're talking about Senate Bill 7, do you have any thoughts on what all is going to be included that bill? There are several components of water supply plan, right? So are we talking about just the statewide authority, or will it be omnibus?
Senate Bill 7 will be the SJR only. That's really the only thing that I deem. They're all going to be necessary. There obviously is some legislation to create the authority. There's legislation to tweak some of the current water statutes to where there's artificial barriers that probably could be barriers if we didn't remove them for water supply development. So there's little tweaks along the way in that realm, but those are not governor's priority list, right? The big item of the day is to get the funding set up, and that'll be the SJR. So Senate Bill 7 will be the SJR for the constitutionally dedicated money. All the other water legislation, and we've talked about, is it an omnibus bill or is it separate pieces and single shots? All of them are important to pass. When you put an omnibus bill, and for those people that will challenge it, they're going to be in a minority, and they're going to be challenging it not because of the merits, but just because of the politics. I give them more opportunity to give point of orders. And so by design, I think separate, although typically big bills as far as big moves, but very simple to understand where we're going. We've built consensus on most of these. I think you have, or if you're not, you need to get with us and kind of vet kind of your concerns. They're open for what we're looking at. We think the stakeholders that have engaged on the issues that were relevant to them on those other bills are consensus bills now. And we feel pretty good about them. But that's not the bills, the Senate Bill 7. It's the funding. It's that SJR component dedicating that revenue that is Senate Bill 7. I would love to file it today. There are reasons why I think next week is going to be better.
All right. More hands? Now, this can include compliments.
Or not. I've been married 40-something years.
Comments?
Compliments are not something I'm used to.
Okay. Perry, you're next. I think Vanessa has. the
Okay,
mic.
all right, thank you. Nice to see you,
Yes.
Chairman Perry. I was curious, well, first, I'm happy to hear that the Flood Infrastructure Fund is going to be added to the Texas Water Fund. That's great news. And I was wondering if you've ever given thought or would be open to having the Research and Planning Fund that the Water Development Board also administers be included, because I can see how with all of these, new potential projects under the works and, the need to kind of understand what impacts are going to be or how that squares up with the planning process, that there may be a need for that.
There's an admin charge through Senate Bill 28 last year that we appropriated through the statute that they could use. Is it 2%?
2%.
2%. So 2% of the money, in my opinion, can be used by Water Development Board as they see fit, which I would assume research, planning, and other buckets would be available for that recipient. As far as, and I'm not familiar with exactly what the department or the area in that agency is available to you, but I'll let the Water Development Board come to us with LAR requests if they're not getting enough money to do what they think they need to do in proper planning on that. Because anybody's talked to me, and to most of y'all's frustration, but I've been so laser focused on supply, and I'm very protective of those dollars doing anything but being supply intense. I have grown, and I understand politics, and I also long-term policy. It's good to have money going to the other water conversations, because it doesn't make sense to put supply in leaky pipes. I hear that argument all the time. We need to work on some leaky pipe conversations. But I do love the idea that the Water Development Board will have a stream of funding they can budget for projects shorter than every 2 years will of the legislature. So we're addressing them all in the right way, the best way, with the amount of money we're going to have. It's going to be significant impact on those projects. So I think we're going to, I think most people are going to be happy. There's always don't like the split that don't come out. But as I've said, people don't call me and ask me, do my pipes leak? They ask me if there's water in the pipes to use. And that's where we've got to go as a state.
All right. Perry Fowler.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you. I'd like to echo Sarah's thanks for your leadership. We certainly think that this is our moment in water right now. And I guess there's a lot of excitement about dedicated revenues, especially in looking at what that has managed to accomplish in the transportation arena. There's a lot of folks that are out here that would like to see that number be equivalent to what we're doing to transportation. And obviously, I think that would be an ideal situation. I'm curious, where the rubber hits the road on that, and is there opportunity to get that dedicated piece up, especially given your emphasis on water supply? And my second part of the question is what can the people in this room do to help you to make this happen and be a success, given this is the moment that we need to do this?
Yeah, so really, in general sense, there's two places to dedicate revenue. There's the rainy day, which is severance tax driven, and earnings, investment earnings. That's one bucket. That's a dedicated opportunity. So you know, we've dedicated 75% of that fund. 37.5 goes to schools, 37.5 goes to roads and bridges. So that's had that dedication conversation before. We're approaching cap again. We are so successful in oil and gas, but here, interesting enough, Hager yesterday in committee said that we have reached a point where our earnings, kind of like the PUF fund, the PUF fund was originally set up with oil and gas severance tax productions, and it still is a beneficiary of significant production, but over the time, it's really more investment earnings on those severance taxes and production and income through oil and gas that it's evolved to a $38-40 billion fund. So our rainy days kind of beginning to get to that point without, as oil and gas production declines, and it will over time, we think the earnings in there can fix it up. So that's one bucket. The other bucket for dedication is sales tax. You got motor vehicle taxes, you have mixed beverage taxes, you have sporting good taxes, which is dedicated to parks and wildlife, but those are all your general sales tax conference. So those are your two buckets. My SJR is going to test the waters on where the members want to go. I have my preference. We'll see where the members go. I hope and I believe, fairly confident, the billion has probably got a lot of momentum where we do that from. That's a conversation I think that finance chair and LBBs and my government will have. But the way interesting enough, this is a good fun fact. When we did the roads and bridges dedication of sales tax in 13, Texas general sales tax, which is our discretionary revenue, it's about 57, 59% of our budget, but that's what we get discretionary how we spend it. Really don't, but that's our funny money, if you will, we can spend. Was $29.5 billion or so in 13 per year. Fast forward, last budget session, it was almost $48 billion. So 13 to 25, we almost doubled our general sales tax revenue. That tells you how successful Texas model, policies, budgeting, and growth has expedited. So what they did in the sales tax dedication for the roads is pretty cool, is they said anything above a certain amount, I think 29.5, they would get the first 2.5 billion, I think, and then after that, it would start going back in. That's produced $38 billion funding now for roads. I would like to build it into a sales tax number because it does have that growth potential. I don't know that that's the best place to do it according to members. What would be your base? Would we back it up to pre-COVID so that we're guaranteed growth? Would we back it up to last session, which is the highest sales tax we've ever had, and we're actually reducing or small, moderate growth in it? Where do we go with that before I make that policy? Because we're going to have to live with it. And if it produces $200 million, and the problem with that is it's not a predictable, right? So I'm looking for a set dollar that's flat and predictable up to what are my other options to accumulate growth. So we're kind of working through that.
And what can they do to help you?
I think, number one, y'all have done a ton. It's not a Perry plan. I'm very, not offended by it, but I'm just very cognizant of, I just happen to be here. Unfortunately, the time has arrived. We can't go any longer without somebody saying something. So I feel like I'm that guy I got to say something. So, but it's for all of the energies and efforts that everybody across the state for the last 2 years specifically that we're having this conversation, and I'm thankful for that. So I hope and I think we're going to be extremely successful. I think most people are going to say, wow, that was a good session, and we're good going forward, and Texas can look forward and say, we got you. I think that it's going to happen. So keep doing what you're doing. When that SJR is put out there with the billion, that's what I'm asking, I really need some door knocks and just say, look, here's the magnitude of the universe that we live in, and this is just a small piece of it, but it's a start. And start having those engagements. I think you're going to find very open conversations to do it, but just keep doing what you're doing. I don't need people crashing phones and getting crazy, but and I know you won't, but just keep talking about the need, and it can be as big as we want to be, but I think we're in a good place.
Thank you, Senator.
No problem.
Yeah, appreciate your time and your leadership on this issue. Whatever we call it, I hope we get it done.
Yep.
But I think history will remember your significant contribution to that.
I will say one comment stuck out in all the meetings across the state I've had, and it was in a recent meeting. It was in Perry Fowler's meeting, actually. And a gentleman there, a little grayer hair than mine, but he said, there was a bunch of people saying no in the 60s when we started building dams after the drought of 50s. And if it wasn't for Livingston Dam, there'd be no Houston, Texas today. I think we're on the precipice of having that same conversation 60 years from now and look back. And what we do now will determine what the quality of that 60-year look back is. So we're in a good spot, and I thank you all for that. I thank you for the energy in it. We got lots of things to do, but at the end of the day, it's not that hard. Texas does big things. This is the biggest thing we're going to do probably in this century. and look back. But we are known for big things. Our grid, our roads, the things we do. This is the last piece of the three-legged stool that when we get it right, y'all won't ever have to worry about living anywhere else but Texas. And I like that feeling. So thank you, guys.